Governor, first off, I mean, when we first spoke right after the attack, you said it was difficult to quantify the impact, the cost of the attack. Can you tell us now?
Good morning. The first message I'd like to give is that the security situation has been stabilized a great deal since I last spoke to you. The security services have done a very good job in dealing with a very small group of extremists who undertook the bombings. They've also taken firm action against people, the extremists who created disturbances in the subsequent weeks. So that situation is now under control and a great deal of normalcy has returned. On the growth narrative and the impact on the economy, large swathes of the productive capacity of the economy was not touched. The tourism sector has taken a big hit. Tourism accounts for 5% of GDP, 5% of employment, and 5% of our VAT collection. So clearly there will be an impact. It's still too early to assess how much that impact will be.
But some say the 3.5% growth target for the year will have to be reviewed, and that Sri Lanka is likely to see its weakest growth in 2 decades.
Well, certainly the growth number will have to be reviewed, and it will be somewhat lower. As to how much lower, it's difficult to say. As I said, much of the economy, except for the tourism sector, and the impact on domestic aggregate demand due to some loss in income as a result of these heinous actions, that will have an impact on the growth story. But how much, it's difficult to say. So we will have to revise it, but it's too early to say to what extent. But the important thing is that the large part of the productive capacity of the economy is in place. Exports, for instance, outside the tourism receipts, if you look at exports, they're largely unaffected. So the capacity to bounce back quickly is there. How quickly will depend on whether there is now normalcy and that is sustained. If it is, I think this is something that's manageable, particularly as we went into these difficulties with very sound macroeconomic fundamentals, and those fundamentals have held up pretty well, even in the aftermath.
Rajeeva, foreign investors fled Sri Lanka after the attacks. Are they back?
Well, if you really look at the market, we saw the indices in the immediate aftermath dropping by about 6%, and to be expected the volumes to drop. But since then, there have been a recovery in the market. And I wouldn't really say that foreigners fled away. In fact, they stayed invested. And we have seen, in fact, for the last 1 month, since the 23rd of April, inflow of foreign funds of about, in rupee terms, LKR, it's about 3.6 billion, which is very encouraging, in fact.
Do you expect that to continue to grow?
I would think so.
What are the indicators?
I think fundamentally the market offers very good value at P's at 8.5 times. Relative to most of the markets in the region, I think it's a very attractive investment. The company fundamentals are strong, there's growth potential, and I think foreign investors have quite rightly identified these factors, and I think decided to stay invested on one hand, and also to make newer investments simply because they feel that the pricing and the potential is there for them to get into a market such as ours.
Governor, earlier we talked about how Sri Lanka has secured the latest tranche from the IMF, $146 billion. That's helpful. Do you see the need to tap the market further, given that revenues are slowing?
Well, our borrowing plans for this year envisaged us raising about $2 billion more. And it'd be interesting to your viewers that the IMF, in its assessment last week, the head of the IMF Sri Lanka team, Manuela Garetti, in fact, said that she didn't anticipate any refinancing problems for Sri Lanka, and she anticipated Sri Lanka going back into the market fairly
How will
quickly.
you raise the $2 billion?
So we're looking at various options. It could be a dollar-denominated ISB, it could be a samurai bond, it could be a panda bond, it could be a syndicated loan. We're looking at all these options. And what is very heartening is that as a response in terms of assisting Sri Lanka in the aftermath of these heinous acts, the World Bank has offered us a policy-based guarantee. They have set aside $250 million US for that. That can be leveraged up 4 times. So that's $1 billion. So of the $2 billion that we need to obtain, $1 billion can be raised on the World Bank's AAA rating.
Governor, you've indicated earlier that you're willing to ease your monetary policy.
Yes.
Would the attack make it even timelier for you to be easing monetary policy now?
Certainly that is something we would need to consider. At the last Monetary Board review of monetary policy. Forward guidance was given that if the conditions that were there at the end of March persisted, that the Monetary Board would seriously consider easing monetary policy. Since then, clearly this hit to growth has increased the output gap even more, and we are not seeing, and private sector credit has also slowed down. Monetary aggregates are where we want them to be. So there is certainly a case for relaxing monetary policy, but what we will be watching is really the external conditions and the pressure on the rupee. At the moment, the rupee has reacted very well, given the impact of these events. We have actually seen the rupee appreciate during the course of the year. There was some depreciation after the 18th of April, but now we are seeing it stabilizing and even appreciating a little bit last week.
Rajeeva, I just want to touch on how the Colombo Stock Exchange has been wanting this tech transfer to take the stock exchange forward. What are the views on that, and where are you in the conversation? Because you've been in talks with regional as well as global players.
Yeah, I think we first need to demutualize the exchange to do the conversion from a guarantee company to a company limited by shares. The necessary legislation is already in Parliament, and once the act to demutualize the exchange is approved, we have 1 year within which we do the paperwork to do the conversion. Now, as a part of the demutualization, we are also looking at a strategic partner, someone who can give us the technology transfer and the knowledge, the product know-how. So we have been talking to about 3 or 4 exchanges globally and regionally, and I guess there's a lot of interest in the exchange.
And that will happen in 3 years, 5 years?
Our vision, demutualization should happen within the next 1 year. Our vision is to become a diversified, profitable listed exchange in the next 5 to 6 years. We are, for the most, a one product market, equity, and a little bit of debt, but we like to see a more diversified product range.